Welcome back. Yesterday, we caught up with Congresswoman Erin Houchin of Indiana's 9th Congressional District. She's on some pretty interesting committees, and she shared some interesting details about what she was working on. Take a listen.
So the notion of a report coming out in 60 days when the threat environment is so high in the United States, irrespective of party, is not acceptable.
You should have come today ready to give us answers. I call upon you to resign today.
Would you like to use my 5 minutes to draft your resignation letter, yes or no?
No, thank you.
People just assume that whoever is in charge takes full responsibility when there's never been, at least on this magnitude and scale, this sort of failure.
Quite the bipartisan show of force in the condemnation of disgraced former Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheatle, also the good friend of Jill Biden, in her gross failure to protect our former president. In these chaotic and divided and very historic times, is it possible that we have a new era of bipartisanship on the horizon? With a lame duck president at the helm, can the next few months be actually a time for governing? With the GOP now fully focused on the working class on the policy front, driven by Senators J.D. Vance and Josh Hawley, what legislation can be achieved for our hardworking men and women? Joining us now is Congresswoman Erin Houchin of Indiana's 9th Congressional District. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance is very much focused on the working class and growing opportunities for them, and that's why President Trump, I believe, picked him. With your work in committee regarding labor, what are some initiatives the GOP can do between now and the election for the working class?
Sure, I'm pleased to see J.D. Vance was the pick of Donald Trump for vice president. I think he speaks to what can be accomplished and achieved under the American dream that we once knew. Unfortunately, this Biden and Harris administration has really dampened opportunities to seek the American dream for workers all across the country. We've seen President Trump's no tax on tips proposal wildly popular among working Americans. We need to do things to grow this economy and bring jobs back to America. We need to focus on our tax policy, restoring American energy. Let's get Americans back to work here in the United States.
Well, what kind of bipartisan legislation do you think is even possible? I mean, I know that there's this nice little honeymoon period where it seems that left and right are coming together to agree that there's this need to look into this assassination attempt. But as you and I both know, those honeymoon periods can fade awfully quick.
I will say that what most people don't know about how Washington works or doesn't work, I usually say it's more functional than people know. That's not to say it's completely fully functional. It does have its dysfunction, but we do work together. You saw just yesterday, it was unanimous support for the creation of the task force to investigate what happened with the attempted assassination of Donald Trump on July 13th. So I do think there are opportunities for us to work together. We've seen some negotiations back and forth, although I will say as we get closer and closer to the election, I think those windows are going to tighten. But we ought to be able to take advantage of some of those opportunities. We just saw a bill proposed in the Senate, the Kids Online Safety Act. I'm a sponsor of that in the House. So I think we will see some bipartisanship, whether it's focused on workforce or not. On our workforce issues, Republicans passed H.R. 1 many months ago. That is to unleash American energy. We also have our border security bill. All of these pieces are going to be important in rebuilding our economy, and so we hope that Democrats will come to the table and to work with us on those issues.
Congresswoman, I know that Vice President Harris was in Indianapolis on a campaign swing. Tell us a little bit about how the people of Indiana feel under the last 4 years of the Biden-Harris presidency, and then potentially how they would feel with a Harris becoming president, how that affects Indiana lives.
Look, I don't think anyone in Indiana or across the country can say they are better off now than they were 4 years ago under this administration, the economy, under Bidenflation. You know, Vice President Harris has been front and center of all of these things. So what they're looking at with a Vice President Harris as president is more of Joe Biden's bad policies. In Indiana, families are suffering. because of the fentanyl crisis, because of a depressed economy, because of rising inflation, making everything from food, fuel to fertilizer cost more. So when they're looking at this election, I think they're going to look at how much better they were under the Trump administration, and they're going to choose to go back to that. I will say it was remarkable and unbelievable that Vice President Harris would not be in the chamber yesterday to greet Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. It was not insignificant that she was on a campaign stop in Indiana. That's completely out of touch with where we are in terms of our country's national security. She should have been there supporting Prime Minister Netanyahu and his continued relationship and the State of Israel's continued relationship with the United States of America as the only democracy in the Middle East. She should have been there.
Well, it certainly speaks to a lack of leadership, I think, literally and figuratively, that when Bibi Netanyahu visited Washington, D.C., he had almost no official delegations welcoming him, save for Congress. And he's visited with President Trump, had discussions with him, and I find it remarkable, Congresswoman, that world leaders are already treating Trump as if he is the president. We saw the Hungarian Prime Minister go and visit Trump after his NATO visit. We've heard that President Zelensky has had a very nice phone call with President Trump recently, and now Netanyahu going out of his way to go visit with President Trump on this visit. It just seems that that's a signal from the world that there's this anticipation Biden and Harris are not really in charge at this moment.
I think that's true. I think that's evident that, in particular with Iran's known threat to assassinate Donald Trump. I mean, they know that he will be a strong world leader, and it will make Iran less significant in that region. His strong support for Israel, it speaks a lot to the wedge issue that's being created within the Democratic Party between Jewish Americans and pro-Palestinian supporters that are really pro-Hamas. So we are in an era right now where it's going to be a challenge for the Democrats this fall. We're not going to take anything for granted, but it is significant that these world leaders are seeking meetings now with former President Trump, who's our Republican nominee and not yet the president.
Congresswoman, over the weekend we've watched, or over the last few days, we've watched how the Capitol has undergone this siege from those pro-Palestinian protesters, and many of them carrying Hamas flags, flags of outright terrorism. Where is all of this coming from? You look at the kids who are protesting, and most of them have no idea what they're actually protesting about. They're just repeating slogans, which begs the question, is there something else going on here? It just doesn't seem like this is a huge spontaneous movement that just erupted out of nowhere. Or maybe it has. Maybe it's been bubbling under the surface. We just haven't noticed it. What are your thoughts?
I think first I would say that Benjamin Netanyahu had a very warm welcome in the House chamber yesterday among all that attended, save a couple of people. His remarks were well received. We did have protests going on around Washington, D.C., and you're right. These are people who support terrorist organizations. And we know that funding is coming from Iran into the country to support these pro-Palestinian groups. Some of these kids that are out there, part of these movements, don't really understand who they're supporting and what they're supporting. In fact, some of these students, if they were actually in Gaza, might well be victims because of their lifestyle or their viewpoints. These groups are anti-American. This is an effort to harm the country and the fabric of the country, and it is an outside influence from Iran, and we have to push back against that, and I hope people will start to wake up to it. But it starts really with the president and the vice president, Biden and Harris, who should be leading to say, no more, we need to stand with Israel, and we've not really seen strong statements from them since this whole thing started to erupt.
Yeah, the issue of radicalization, it's one of those things that we as Americans, we consider it as something that happens to other countries, to other kids in other countries. We don't think of extreme radicalization happening here. You see hippies, protesting big banks or whatever, but those are not the level of extremism that we expect or that we have seen just in the last few months, and it's so alarming, Congresswoman. Looking forward, what are you hoping to accomplish under Speaker Johnson as we close out this year?
I would say that there should be a tremendous emphasis on our universities as well as K through 12 schools that are really using these to indoctrinate students. We've heard on the Hill in our committee on education from these university presidents who cannot say that it is not okay to call for the eradication of an entire population of people. These words that are being chosen on these universities are to dehumanize an entire group of people. We've heard from parents of elementary school children whose Jewish children have been targeted in the United States for their beliefs. That is not what this country is about. We have to stand strong against it. So I think you'll see additional work coming out of the Education and the Workforce Committee on this front, particular with emphasis in our universities and how to get it out of there, as well as our K through 12 schools.
Who would have thought, Congresswoman, that a committee on education would have to be dealing with radicalism of this nature in America? We appreciate all the work you're putting into it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
For all our viewers asking where One America News is heading in the future, we would like to introduce you to OAN Live. OAN Live is the best way to stay up to date on all of the hard-hitting, straight-shooting, national and international headlines. And the best part is, OAN Live is only $4.99 per month. All the credible, honest, unbiased reporting One America News offers at a fraction of the cost of cable. Just go to OANN.com to easily sign up for OAN Live and stay informed.